What if you could press pause on an entire civilization, not through a story in a book, but in a way that is startlingly real, where the food is still on the table, the footprints are still fresh in the garden, and the sense of daily life is so palpable it feels as though the people have only just stepped away. This is the breathtaking legacy of volcanic eruptions, a paradox where one of nature's most destructive forces becomes its most meticulous archivist. These are not merely ruins we explore, they are moments perfectly frozen, offering us a window into the past with a clarity that defies the centuries. The artifacts preserved by volcanic eruptions are perhaps the most profound time capsules ever created, capturing a snapshot of human existence in the most intimate detail imaginable. Think about the sheer power of a volcano. It is an event of absolute chaos, a roaring, earth-shattering force that reshapes landscapes in hours. Yet, in the wake of that chaos comes an almost divine stillness. A pyroclastic flow, a wave of superheated gas and ash, can race down a mountainside at incredible speeds, engulfing everything in its path. But in that terrifying instant, it does something extraordinary. It doesn't just crush and burn, it encapsulates. It surrounds a wooden chair, a loaf of bread, an entire marketplace in a fine, hot ash that settles and then hardens into a solid, airtight shell. This shell acts as a perfect seal, protecting the world within from wind, rain, and the decay of time. It is a tomb of volcanic clay, yes, but it is also a vault safeguarding the most fragile pieces of a culture, the things that normally vanish without a trace. This video is an invitation to step inside that vault. We will journey from the legendary streets of Pompeii, where the casts of fallen citizens tell a silent, heartbreaking story, to the humble farming village of Joya de Cerén in El Salvador, often called the Pompeii of the Americas, where the lives of common people were preserved with stunning fidelity. We will see how science allows us to read the layers of ash like the pages of a history book, deciphering not just what happened, but how people lived, loved, worked, and faced an unimaginable disaster. We are about to uncover the secrets these eruptions have guarded for centuries, from preserved ancient artwork to the very seeds of crops planted 2,000 years ago. This is more than an archaeological exploration. It is a deeply human connection to our shared past, a chance to reach across time and touch a world we thought was lost forever. So let's begin this journey into the stillness, to discover what was saved when time itself froze in clay. To truly grasp this miracle of preservation, we need to understand the mechanics of a pyroclastic flow. Picture not a slow-moving river of lava, but an avalanche of superheated terror. It is a dense, fast-moving current of hot gas, ash, and rock fragments that can travel down the slopes of a volcano at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour, with temperatures often reaching several hundred degrees Celsius. This is not merely a cloud of dust, it is a fluidized mass that hugs the ground, obliterating everything in its path through sheer force and intense heat. Yet within this destructive fury lies the secret to its preserving power. The flow doesn't just incinerate objects outright. Instead, it can instantly envelop them in a thick, searing hot blanket. This rapid engulfment drives out oxygen and creates an environment where the normal processes of decay caused by bacteria, insects, and weathering are instantly halted. The ash and pumice, which are incredibly fine-grained, settle into every crevice, forming a perfect mold around objects before eventually cooling and cementing into a solid, rock-like layer known as tuff. This encasement is so effective that it can protect the most delicate structures, from the weave of a basket to the leaves on a tree for centuries. It's a bit like a potter plunging a hot clay creation into a bucket of cold water to set its shape, only on a catastrophic, landscape-wide scale. The volcano, in its violent climax, becomes an unwitting artist, creating a negative space of the world it destroys. This is why we find such astonishing details at these sites. In Herculaneum, for example, the extreme heat of the pyroclastic surges carbonized wooden objects like beds, doors, and even food. Carbonization might sound like burning, but it's a specific process where the organic material is transformed into a carbon copy of itself, a fragile but perfectly preserved charcoal silhouette that retains the original form down to the grain of the wood. This is fundamentally different from how things are preserved in, say, a peat bog or a desert. Those environments excel at saving certain types of materials, bog bodies or dry textiles, but they rarely preserve the entire context. A volcanic burial saves the scene in its entirety. It freezes the relationship between objects. A tool is found exactly where it was dropped. A meal remains on the table. A garden is captured with its plants still in place. This holistic preservation provides archaeologists with something far more valuable than a collection of artifacts. It gives them a moment. It allows us to see not just what people owned, but how they lived within their spaces, creating a three-dimensional photograph of a day in the life of an ancient civilization. This unique combination of instant termination and perfect sealing is what makes volcanic sites so unparalleled, turning the volcano from a mere agent of destruction into history's most accidental and effective archaeologist. Of all the windows into the ancient world, none is clearer or more poignant than the one offered by the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the year 79 AD was a catastrophe of unimaginable scale, but it gifted posterity with an archaeological miracle. While both cities met the same fate, the manner of their preservation created two distinct, complementary time capsules. Pompeii, situated further southeast of the volcano, was buried under a relentless downpour of lightweight pumice stone and ash. This layer, falling for hours, accumulated to a depth of over 13 feet, collapsing roofs and trapping those who had not fled, but encasing the city in a soft, lightweight blanket that would later harden into a protective shell. Herculaneum, closer to the base of Vesuvius, faced a different, more ferocious end. It was not buried by a gentle fall of ash, but annihilated by a series of pyroclastic surges, those ground-hugging waves of superheated gas and rock we discussed. These surges, with temperatures instantly vaporizing flesh and boiling brains, hit Herculaneum with such force that they filled buildings from the ground up, carbonizing organic matter in an instant. This fundamental difference is why Herculaneum offers an even more intimate level of detail. In Pompeii, we have the city's stone skeleton, its public squares and homes. In Herculaneum, we have its soul, the wooden beds, the cribs, the carbonized loaves of bread, and even the preserved netting of a fishing hamlet, items that simply do not survive elsewhere. The most haunting connections to these events are the human remains. In Pompeii, the pioneering archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli made a heartbreaking discovery in the 1860s. He noticed that as bodies decomposed within the hardened ash, they left behind perfect cavities, voids in the shape of the deceased. By carefully injecting plaster of Paris into these spaces, Fiorelli and his successors were able to create casts of the victims in their final moments. These are not statues, they are death masks of real people. We see a man crouching, covering his face with his hands, a mother huddled with her children. A group of individuals trapped together, their postures speaking volumes about their final, desperate seconds. The detail is so fine that the folds of their clothing are visible. In Herculaneum, the story is told by the skeletons themselves. Because the pyroclastic surges were so intensely hot, they caused soft tissue to vaporize immediately, leaving skeletons often found in more cohesive groups, huddled in boat sheds along what was then the shoreline, where they had hoped to find rescue by sea. Analysis of these bones provides a biological diary. We can tell what these people ate, a diet heavy in grains and seafood for the common folk, with more varied meats for the wealthy. We can see evidence of manual labor in their spinal columns and signs of diseases. They are not anonymous figures from a history book. They are individuals whose lives and final struggles we can reconstruct with startling accuracy. Walking through the excavated streets of Pompeii is like stepping into a living, breathing Roman city, only one suddenly emptied of its people. You can stroll down main thoroughfares, your footsteps echoing on the large basalt paving stones, still grooved by the wheels of countless carts. You can peer into a bakery and see the stone mills used to grind flour, the oven still standing ready. You can visit the Forum, the political and commercial heart of the city, surrounded by temples and public buildings. The social structure of Roman life is laid bare. The grand villas of the wealthy, like the House of the Vetii with its exquisite frescoes depicting myths and its beautiful interior garden, stand in stark contrast to the modest apartments and shops of the everyday citizens. The city was vibrant, complex, and at times vulgar, with graffiti scrawled on walls advertising gladiatorial games, proclaiming political support, or simply declaring love. Herculaneum, being a smaller, wealthier seaside town, offers a different perspective. Its homes were often more luxurious, with elaborate mosaic floors and stunning views of the Bay of Naples. Perhaps one of the most significant finds there is the Villa of the Papyri, a massive estate that contained a library of hundreds of papyrus scrolls, carbonized by the heat but preserved in form. For the first time, we are not just guessing about Roman life from the writings of emperors and philosophers. We are seeing it firsthand, from the food on a tavern counter to the political slogans on a wall. This is a level of detail that transforms history from an abstract concept into a tangible, deeply human experience. But the story of volcanic time capsules is not confined to the shadow of Vesuvius. This incredible phenomenon of preservation has occurred across the globe, each site offering a unique and equally priceless window into a different chapter of the human story. The value of these sites lies precisely in their diversity. While Pompeii shows us the height of Roman urban life, other locations reveal the worlds of farmers, of Bronze Age traders, of cultures that left no written records of their own. Perhaps the most beautiful example of this is found not in Europe but in Central America. In El Salvador, the ancient village of Joya de Cerén was buried around the year 600 AD by the eruption of the Loma Caldera volcano. It is so exquisitely preserved that it has earned the nickname the Pompeii of the Americas, but the comparison only goes so far. Pompeii was a bustling, cosmopolitan commercial center. Cerén, in stark contrast, was a humble farming community of simple, thatch-roofed households. Its incredible value to archaeology is that it captures the life of the common person, the individual who is almost always invisible in the grand narratives of history. The eruption happened so quickly that people fled, leaving their daily lives perfectly intact. Archaeologists found meals half-eaten on plates, weaving implements dropped mid-task, and gardening tools leaning against the walls of homes. They discovered storehouses filled with pots of beans, chili peppers, and maize. Most astonishingly, they found entire agricultural fields preserved under the ash, including a manioc plantation. This was a revolutionary find because manioc, a root crop, leaves almost no trace in the archaeological record. At Cerén, the volcanic ash froze the entire farming system in place, showing us exactly how these ancient people cultivated the land that sustained them. This isn't just a collection of artifacts, it is a living diorama of Mesoamerican village life, offering an intimate, ground-level view that is simply unavailable anywhere else. Traveling across the globe and more than 1,000 years further back in time, we find another masterpiece of preservation on the stunning Greek island of Santorini. The Bronze Age city of Akrotiri was entombed by one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history around the year 1600 BC. This event was so colossal that it likely shattered the island, creating the dramatic caldera that defines Santorini today, and its ash cloud may have even contributed to the decline of the mighty Minoan civilization on Crete. But for Akrotiri, the catastrophe was a moment of perfect capture. What excavations have revealed is not a primitive settlement, but a sophisticated, wealthy, and astonishingly modern city. Unlike Pompeii, there have been no human remains found at Akrotiri, suggesting the inhabitants had sufficient warning to evacuate. What they left behind was a time capsule of their advanced culture. The buildings of Akrotiri were multi-storied, with complex drainage systems and signs of sophisticated engineering designed to withstand earthquakes. Stepping into these homes is like walking into an art gallery. The walls are adorned with breathtaking frescoes that have retained their vibrant colors for over 3.5 millennia. These are not simple decorations, they are elaborate narratives. We see scenes of graceful antelopes, flotillas of ships sailing with exuberant passengers, and a famous painting known as the Spring Fresco, depicting a rocky landscape dotted with vivid red lilies and swooping swallows. This art reveals a society deeply connected to the sea, to nature, and to ritual. Akrotiri was a major hub in a vast Mediterranean trade network, and its preservation gives us an unparalleled look into the cosmopolitan world of the Bronze Age, a society of artists, engineers, and merchants whose story would have been almost entirely lost to the immense scale of the disaster that preserved it. From the humble fields of Cerén to the vibrant walls of Akrotiri, these global examples demonstrate that volcanic preservation is a widespread gift to history, each site contributing a completely different piece of the vast puzzle of our past. They teach us that tragedy does not discriminate. It can strike a bustling Roman city, a quiet Salvadoran village, or a thriving Aegean port with equal force. But in doing so, it captures a unique cultural fingerprint. The artifacts from Pompeii tell us about empire and commerce. The remains at Cerén speak to sustainability and community. The ruins of Akrotiri sing of art and interconnectedness. Together, they form a chorus of human experience, reminding us that every society, from the most powerful to the most modest, has a story worth preserving. This global network of time capsules allows archaeologists to compare and contrast different civilizations, understanding not just how one culture lived, but the incredible diversity of human adaptation and creativity across time and space. The volcano, in its terrifying power, becomes an impartial historian, granting us access to worlds we could never have imagined. This process of reading the volcanic record is a meticulous science, a form of geological detective work that begins long before a single artifact is uncovered. When archaeologists arrive at a site like Pompeii or Joya de Cerén, they are not just looking at a uniform blanket of gray material. They are confronted with a layered cake of history, where each distinct stratum holds a specific clue about the eruption's progression. The initial layer might be a thin bed of fine, light ash, representing the first gentle warning falls from the sky, a prelude that would have dusted the rooftops and caused confusion. As they dig deeper, they encounter thicker, heavier layers of pumice, telling the story of the eruption's intensifying fury. when the sky turned black and stones began to rain down with enough force to collapse buildings. Then often comes the most telling layer of all, the compact cement-like deposit from the pyroclastic surge itself, the layer that entombed the city for good. The thickness of each layer indicates the duration and violence of that phase. A thicker pumice layer suggests a longer, more sustained bombardment. The grain size is equally revealing. Fine, powdery ash travels far on the wind, while larger, heavier pumice stones fall closer to the volcano, helping scientists map the eruption's reach and power. By carefully measuring and analyzing these strata, volcanologists can reconstruct the disaster almost hour by hour, creating a timeline of the cataclysm that is as precise as it is chilling. But to turn this relative sequence into an absolute calendar date, scientists employ a powerful toolkit of dating techniques. The most crucial is often radiocarbon dating. Any organic material that was alive at the moment of the eruption, a piece of wood from a roof beam, a charred bean left in a cooking pot, the bones of a victim, contains a radioactive clock. All living things absorb carbon-14 from the atmosphere, and when they die, this isotope begins to decay at a steady, measurable rate. By analyzing the remaining carbon-14 in these preserved samples, researchers can determine with remarkable accuracy when that plant or animal died, effectively pinning the eruption to a specific window in time. For the eruption of Vesuvius, we are fortunate to have a written record from Pliny the Younger that confirms the date as 79 AD, which perfectly validates the radiocarbon dates. For older eruptions, like the one that buried Akrotiri on Santorini, where no written records exist, radiocarbon dating is indispensable, placing the event around the 16th century BC. Sometimes, however, the source of the ash itself is a mystery. This is where geochemistry comes into play. Volcanic ash is essentially finely ground volcanic glass, and each volcano has a unique chemical fingerprint based on the specific composition of magma deep within the earth. Using instruments like electron microprobes, scientists can analyze tiny shards of this glass to measure the precise ratios of elements like silicon, iron, and magnesium. This signature is as distinctive as a genetic code. If an ash layer is found at a distant archaeological site, perhaps hundreds of miles from any known volcano, this chemical analysis can identify exactly which mountain it came from, and even which specific eruption in that volcano's history is responsible. This technique, known as tephrochronology, allows researchers to correlate layers across vast distances, synchronizing the timelines of different cultures and regions. An ash layer from a known eruption becomes a marker horizon, a definitive line in the geological record that says, everything below this point happened before this eruption, and everything above happened after. It's a powerful tool that transforms a local tragedy into a global timestamp, weaving together the separate stories of human civilizations through the shared thread of geological events. This scientific synthesis of stratigraphy, radiocarbon dating, and geochemistry does more than just satisfy curiosity. It builds a robust, evidence-based narrative of the past, allowing us to understand not only the lives that were lived but the precise moment they were frozen in time. This is where history truly comes alive, not in the grand statues of emperors or the chronicles of battles, but in the quiet, mundane details of a Tuesday afternoon. The artifacts we find in these volcanic tombs are so ordinary, so deeply human, that they bridge the gap of centuries in a heartbeat. Consider the simple act of sharing a meal. In a bakery in Pompeii, archaeologists uncovered 81 loaves of bread, still sealed inside a large stone oven. They had been baked on the very morning of the eruption, their round, scored forms carbonized by the intense heat, yet their shape so perfectly intact that you can still see the baker's mark. This isn't just a piece of bread, it's a testament to a working day cut short, a business interrupted, and the universal human need for sustenance. Nearby, in the modest home of a family, a carbonized egg was discovered in a cooking pot. Someone had cracked it open, perhaps to prepare a simple lunch, and then fled, leaving behind a moment of domestic life frozen forever. These finds tell a story that scrolls and inscriptions never could. They reveal the rhythm of the day, the common diet of grains, vegetables, and legumes, and the sheer normalcy of life that continued right up until the moment the world ended. The preservation extends far beyond the kitchen. In Herculaneum, the searing pyroclastic surges carbonized wood, a material that almost never survives from antiquity. This has given us an unprecedented look into Roman interior design and craftsmanship. Walk through the houses there, and you can see actual wooden doors still hanging on their hinges, their panels and frames perfectly preserved. You can peer into a bedroom and see a wooden bed, its headboard and frame looking as if they were made yesterday. In one poignant discovery, a child's crib was found, a small wooden bed that would have been rocked to soothe a baby to sleep. The existence of such a delicate, everyday object transforms these ruins from abstract archaeological sites into someone's home. We can imagine the sounds, the sights, the very feeling of these spaces. We see wooden shelves that held household goods, wooden chests that stored clothing, and even a wooden partition screen in a shop. This level of preservation allows us to appreciate the skill of Roman carpenters and joiners, to understand the types of wood they preferred, and to see how they furnished their lives with both practicality and aesthetic sense. It's a complete reversal of our usual understanding. Instead of imagining what might have been, we are looking directly at what was. This intimate view is perhaps even more striking at Joya de Cerén in El Salvador. Unlike the wealthy Roman world, this was a community of farmers, and their preserved village offers a rare and precious glimpse into the lives of the common people who formed the backbone of ancient society. In one household, archaeologists found a series of pots still sitting on the hearth in a kitchen area. One pot contained a hardened mass that, upon analysis, proved to be beans that had been left to simmer. Another held a batch of chili peppers. The inhabitants had clearly fled in the middle of preparing a meal. Outside, a set of gardening tools, a hoe and other implements, were found leaning against the wall of a storehouse, as if the farmer had just put them down for a moment. In another building, identified as a community workshop, bundles of indigo plants were found laid out to dry, ready to be used for making blue dye. This evidence of a localized cottage industry is something that would have vanished without a trace under normal circumstances. At Cerén, we are not just learning what people ate or what tools they used. We are seeing their entire economic and domestic system in a state of pause. We learn about crop storage, food preparation techniques, and even community specialization, all from the quiet evidence left behind in the frantic moments of escape. These are the stories of history's silent majority, finally given a voice by the very disaster that silenced them. What makes these everyday objects so powerful is their ability to illuminate the vast, undocumented space between the elite and the impoverished. Historical texts were almost exclusively written by and for the wealthy and powerful. They tell us about emperors, senators, and military campaigns. But what about the baker, the carpenter, the farmer? Their lives were considered too ordinary to record. Volcanic preservation corrects this historical bias. It democratizes the past. The carbonized loaf of bread tells us as much about Roman society as a Senate decree because it speaks to the economy, the technology of food production, and the daily struggles of the vast majority of the population. The preserved wooden furniture from Herculaneum shows a level of comfort and craftsmanship that was available to a prosperous, but not necessarily aristocratic, middle class. The farming tools at Cerén reveal a sophisticated knowledge of agriculture and a sustainable way of life that supported an entire community. These artifacts force us to rewrite our history books, not with new dates or names, but with a newfound understanding of the texture of daily existence. They remind us that history is not just a sequence of great events, but the accumulated experience of countless individuals going about their lives, loving their families, practicing their trades, and sitting down to a simple meal, a reality that was, until these miraculous preservations, almost entirely lost to time. And so we arrive at the most personal and profound aspect of these frozen cities, the human toll. While the preserved objects give us context, it is the victims themselves who provide the soul. The famous body casts of Pompeii are perhaps the most powerful archaeological artifacts ever created, but there is a common misconception about what they are. They are not petrified bodies turned to stone. The reality is both more tragic and more scientifically fascinating. When the hot ash and pumice settled around those who had perished, it hardened into a solid shell. Over the centuries, the soft tissues of the bodies decomposed completely, leaving behind nothing but a hollow space within the volcanic rock, a perfect negative impression of a person in their final moment. It was the ingenious archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli in the 1860s who realized that by carefully pouring liquid plaster of Paris into these cavities, he could create a cast of the void. As the plaster set, it captured every detail, the folds of a tunic, the expression of agony on a face, the protective curl of a body. When the surrounding ash is chipped away, what remains is a plaster sculpture of an empty space, a ghostly representation of a life lost. This technique has since been refined, with modern archaeologists using clear resin instead of plaster for some casts, allowing the bones, which often remained inside the cavity, to be visible within the transparent form, merging the skeletal evidence with the emotional shape of the cast. The postures of these casts tell silent, heartbreaking stories without need for words. There is the cast of a man found crouching, his cloak pulled over his head in a futile attempt to shield himself from the falling ash and toxic gases. We see a group of individuals huddled together in a garden, perhaps a family who thought they could wait out the disaster in the open air, only to be overcome. One of the most poignant is the cast often referred to as the two maidens, though later analysis revealed they were likely a young man and a woman, found embracing in their final seconds. But perhaps the most universally affecting image is that of a mother and child. In one cast, we see the clear outline of a small child nestled against an adult, their forms fused together in a last protective gesture. These are not dramatic poses staged for effect. They are the raw, instinctual reactions of people facing an unimaginable end. They capture fear, despair, and most powerfully, love. This immediate, visceral connection is what separates these finds from any other. We are not looking at a skull in a museum case. We are standing face to face with a moment of ultimate humanity, frozen for eternity. The story at Herculaneum, however, is different and in some ways even more stark. The city was not buried by a gradual fall of ash, but was hit by successive pyroclastic surges, waves of gas and rock heated to nearly 500 degrees Celsius. The effect was instantaneous and horrifyingly complete. The heat was so extreme that it caused the soft tissues of the victims to vaporize instantly. What archaeologists find are not hollow spaces for casts, but skeletons, often clustered in stone boathouses along the ancient shoreline where hundreds had fled in a desperate hope of rescue by sea. For a long time, it was thought these people died of suffocation. But groundbreaking scientific analysis of these bones in recent decades has revealed a more violent end. Researchers studying the pattern of discoloration and cracks in the bone collagen discovered something startling. The heat was so intense that it caused the victims' blood to boil and their skulls to explode. The patterns on the bones are consistent with rapid exposure to extreme heat, leading to the conclusion that death was not from slow asphyxiation but was virtually instantaneous, a thermal shock that would have killed a person in less than a second. This scientific finding adds a new, chilling layer to the tragedy. While the people of Pompeii may have struggled for hours under a darkening sky, those in Herculaneum were killed in an instant by an invisible, fiery wave. Yet, even in death, these skeletons are biographies. By studying the bones from Herculaneum, bioarchaeologists can read the lives these people led. Analysis of isotopes in the teeth and bones reveals their diet, showing a reliance on seafood and terrestrial grains, with the wealthy enjoying a more varied diet including expensive imported foods. The vertebrae of many men show signs of degenerative joint disease, evidence of a life of heavy physical labor, perhaps as fishermen or sailors. Some skeletons show healed fractures, telling stories of past accidents survived. Women's bones can show the physical stresses of childbirth. We can even identify individuals who suffered from chronic conditions like anemia or dental abscesses. This transforms these anonymous remains back into individuals. We learn about their health, their occupations, their social status, and their hardships. The man with the strong, muscular arms was likely an oarsman. The woman with signs of osteoporosis may have been elderly. A child's skeleton might show evidence of malnutrition. These are not just statistics, they are the accumulated experiences of a life written in calcium and phosphate. The volcanic eruption, in its terrible finality, did not erase these stories. It preserved them with a brutal honesty, allowing us to meet these people not as characters in a history book, but as human beings whose lives and deaths we can now begin to understand. This connection across millennia is the ultimate power of these sites, reminding us that the past is populated not by abstractions, but by people who loved, feared, and hoped just as we do. While the grand villas of Pompeii and the vibrant frescoes of Akrotiri capture our imagination with tales of art and commerce, some of the most revolutionary insights come from a much quieter, more fundamental aspect of ancient life: how people fed themselves. The preservation of entire agricultural landscapes by volcanic ash offers a view into ancient farming that is almost unparalleled in archaeology. Normally, when we study ancient agriculture, we are left with indirect clues: the occasional charred seed, the impression of a plow on a stone, or the analysis of pollen from lake beds. These are fragments of a much larger picture. But at a place like Joya de Cerén, the volcano didn't just preserve a few seeds, it preserved the entire farm, frozen at a precise moment in the agricultural calendar. This is like having a detailed photograph of a working farm from the 7th century, one that reveals not just what was grown, but how it was grown, managed, and integrated into daily life. The discovery of the manioc fields at Joya de Cerén was a particular breakthrough that sent ripples through the world of archaeology. Manioc, also known as cassava, is a root crop that is a staple food for millions of people today, especially in tropical regions. It is highly nutritious and drought-resistant, but it has a major problem from an archaeologist's perspective. Its soft, starchy roots decompose rapidly, leaving almost no trace in the soil. Before the excavation of Cerén, there was very little direct evidence that the ancient Maya of this region cultivated manioc on a large scale. Scholars had hypothesized about its importance based on linguistic evidence and comparisons with modern practices, but the proof was elusive. Then at Cerén, archaeologists uncovered a field of manioc plants. preserved so perfectly by the volcanic ash that the individual ridges of the soil mounds and the precise layout of the plants were perfectly clear. The eruption had struck just after the plants had been harvested, but the farmer had already replanted stalk cuttings in the same mounds to grow a new crop. This single find transformed our understanding of the ancient Mesoamerican diet, proving that manioc was not just a minor garden plant but a central, organized part of their agriculture, a reliable carbohydrate source that could support a community. This snapshot also reveals a sophisticated understanding of horticulture. The fields at Cerén were not just simple plots, they were carefully managed systems. Researchers found evidence of intercropping where different plants were grown together in the same field. For instance, maize was found growing alongside the manioc. This is a brilliant agricultural strategy. The tall maize stalks provide support for climbing beans, a classic combination known as the Three Sisters in North America, while the manioc plants, which grow lower to the ground, help to suppress weeds and retain soil moisture. This method maximizes the yield from a single plot of land, creates a more balanced diet, and is far more resilient to pest outbreaks or variable weather than a single crop or monoculture system. It shows that these ancient farmers possessed a deep, practical knowledge of their ecosystem. They weren't just planting seeds, they were cultivating a miniature, symbiotic environment. This kind of sustainable practice is something that modern agriculture is only now rediscovering after a century of relying heavily on monocultures that can deplete the soil. Beyond the crops themselves, the preservation of the farming tools and infrastructure is equally telling. At Cerén, a wooden digging stick was found leaning against the wall of a storehouse, its pointed end hardened by fire. This simple tool was the ancient equivalent of a plow, used for turning the soil and planting seeds. The fact that it was found right where it was left underscores the suddenness of the event. But more importantly, we can see the entire workflow. The farmers had storage jars called cantaros, filled with seeds ready for planting. They had areas designated for processing crops. We can see the footpaths they used to walk between their homes and their fields. This holistic view allows us to understand the rhythm of their lives, the cycle of planting, tending, harvesting, and storing that governed their year. It moves the study of ancient economics from abstract theory to tangible reality. We can calculate roughly how many people a field of that size could support, giving us a much clearer picture of the population and economic stability of the village. The ultimate value of this agricultural time capsule is its lesson in sustainability. The people of Joya de Cerén were not exploiting their land, they were working with it. Their use of intercropping, their reliance on hardy, native plants like manioc, and their small-scale, intensive farming methods represent a model of long-term environmental balance. They were feeding their community without destroying the resource base that sustained them. In a world increasingly concerned with food security and environmental degradation, these ancient practices offer powerful insights. They remind us that successful agriculture is not just about maximizing short-term yield, but about cultivating a healthy, resilient relationship with the land. The volcano, in preserving this moment, did more than save a field of manioc. It preserved a testament to human ingenuity and a sustainable way of life that resonates deeply with the challenges we face today. Walking through the ruins of an ordinary archaeological site, you are often left to piece together a building story from its foundations and a few scattered stones. But step into a city preserved by volcanic ash, and the architecture rises around you, almost complete, telling its own story of engineering, artistry, and daily life. The preservation of buildings at sites like Akrotiri and Pompeii is nothing short of miraculous. offering a level of detail that transforms our understanding of ancient urban living from an educated guess into a tangible reality. We are not just looking at floor plans, we are walking through homes where the walls still stand tall, the paint is still fresh on the plaster, and the very atmosphere of the place feels hauntingly present. This allows us to appreciate the full spectrum of ancient architecture, from the innovative, earthquake-resistant designs of a Bronze Age metropolis to the bustling, multi-functional streetscapes of a Roman town. Consider the city of Akrotiri on Santorini, a settlement frozen in the Bronze Age. What we find there is not a primitive village but a remarkably modern-looking urban center. The buildings are multi-storied, some reaching 3 stories high, which is an incredible feat of engineering for its time. But even more impressive is the evidence of sophisticated architectural intelligence. The Minoan builders of Akrotiri lived in a seismically active region, and they designed their city to withstand the constant threat of earthquakes. They employed techniques that we would now call aseismic, or earthquake-resistant construction. The lower portions of the walls were often built with large, carefully cut stone blocks, providing a stable and sturdy base. The upper stories, however, were constructed with a framework of timber and rubble masonry. This flexible wooden skeleton would have allowed the building to sway and absorb the energy of an earthquake rather than cracking and collapsing. It's a principle that modern engineers still use today. Furthermore, the layout of the city itself reveals advanced urban planning. There are well-defined, paved streets with a sophisticated drainage system running beneath them, ensuring that wastewater and rainwater were efficiently channeled away from the living areas. Stepping into one of these homes is like entering a gallery. The walls are covered with breathtaking frescoes depicting dolphins leaping, monkeys playing, and elegant figures engaged in rituals, their colors still vibrant after more than 3,500 years. This combination of practical engineering and exquisite art shows a society that valued both resilience and beauty, creating a living environment that was both safe and inspiring. Now contrast this with the overwhelming completeness of Pompeii. Here, the volcanic burial preserved the entire cityscape, allowing us to see the full social stratification of Roman society reflected directly in its architecture. At the top of the scale were the grand villas, the luxurious townhouses of the wealthy elite. A place like the House of the Vetii is a masterpiece of Roman domestic design. You enter through a narrow doorway from the street, a deliberate feature that provided privacy and security from the noisy outside world. But once inside, the space opens up into a breathtaking atrium, an open central courtyard with a pool in the center to collect rainwater. This was the heart of the home, a space for receiving guests and displaying the family's wealth. Beyond the atrium, you would often find a peristyle garden, an open courtyard surrounded by a colonnade filled with statues, fountains, and fragrant plants. The walls of these rooms are adorned with intricate frescoes depicting mythological scenes, and the floors are paved with elaborate mosaics made from thousands of tiny colored stones. One of the most famous is the mosaic in the House of the Faun, a massive and incredibly detailed depiction of a battle between Alexander the Great and the Persian king Darius, a work of art that demonstrates both the owner's wealth and his cosmopolitan taste. But for every grand villa, there were dozens of insulae, the Roman apartment blocks that housed the common people. These multi-story buildings, often with shops or workshops on the ground floor and cramped apartments above, tell a different story of urban life. The preservation in Pompeii allows us to see these buildings in a way that is impossible at other Roman sites. We can see the staircases that led to the upper floors, the small windows that provided light, and the simple, functional layout of the living spaces. We can even study the construction materials, a mix of stone, brick, and a primitive form of concrete known as opus cementitium. This juxtaposition of the opulent villa and the modest insula on the same street provides a complete picture of the Roman city. It was a place of extreme inequality, but also of incredible economic vitality, where the baker, the blacksmith, and the senator all lived in close proximity, their lives intertwined within a single, complex urban fabric. Perhaps one of the most surprising revelations from this architectural preservation is the evidence of advanced comfort and convenience. The Romans were master engineers, and Pompeii shows us this in stunning detail. We can walk down a street and see the raised stepping stones that allowed pedestrians to cross without stepping into the muck and waste that often flowed through the streets. We can look up and see the grooves worn into the stone curbs by the countless carts that passed through the city. Most impressively, we can trace the sophisticated plumbing and water systems. Lead pipes ran beneath the streets, delivering fresh water from an aqueduct to public fountains, bathhouses, and even the homes of the wealthy. In the house of the Vetii, there is even a bronze water heater in the baths. This level of infrastructural detail is something that is almost never preserved. It shows a society that was not just concerned with grandeur, but with practical urban management, public health, and domestic comfort on a scale that would not be matched in Europe for more than 1,000 years after the fall of Rome. The volcano, in its terrible act, gave us a perfect three-dimensional model of an ancient city, allowing us to understand its architecture not as a collection of isolated monuments, but as a living, breathing organism. But perhaps the most profound gift of this carbonization process is the way it saves the most personal and intimate objects, the things that truly define a home. In Herculaneum, we don't just see the architecture, we witness the lives lived within it. A child's wooden crib was found, its delicate frame carbonized but perfectly intact, a silent testament to a family's love and the simple, universal act of caring for a baby. Beds, cabinets, and even partitions that divided rooms have been recovered, showing us how space was used and how privacy was managed in a Roman house. This is a far cry from the stone shells we typically associate with ancient ruins. Here, we have the actual, tangible objects that people touched and used every single day. The carbonized wood even preserves the tool marks of the carpenter, allowing us to study ancient woodworking techniques in exquisite detail. We can see the types of joints they used, the way they smoothed the surfaces, and the kinds of wood they preferred for different purposes, like walnut for fine furniture and oak for structural elements. This transforms our understanding from abstract knowledge into a lived experience. We are not just learning that Romans had furniture, we are seeing the very pieces that furnished their lives, understanding their craftsmanship, and by extension, their aesthetic sensibilities and their desire for comfort and beauty in their daily surroundings. This remarkable preservation extends beyond wood to the even more fragile world of textiles. Fabric is one of the first things to disappear in the archaeological record, usually leaving behind nothing but vague impressions or mineralized fragments attached to metal objects. But at Herculaneum, the intense heat of the pyroclastic surges carbonized textiles as well. While the original fibers are gone, their carbon shadows remain, preserving the weave structure with incredible clarity. Archaeologists have found evidence of blankets on beds, curtains in doorways, and even clothing. By studying these carbonized remnants, they can determine whether a fabric was a simple plain weave or a more complex twill, and estimate the thread count, which tells us about the quality of the cloth and the skill of the weaver. This provides a rare window into the ancient textile industry and personal adornment, revealing aspects of daily life and social status that are almost always invisible. It allows us to move beyond the marble togas seen on statues and understand what ordinary people actually wore to sleep, to work, and to relax in their homes. And then there is the food. Normally, evidence of ancient diet comes from animal bones, charred seeds, or the residues inside pots. But at Herculaneum, we have the food itself, or rather, its perfect carbon copy. In the pantry of a house, a stack of round, flat loaves of bread was found, carbonized but retaining their distinctive scoring, which was likely used to divide the bread into portions. Bowls of fruit, including figs and dates, were discovered, their shapes perfectly preserved despite being turned to charcoal. Perhaps most striking is the discovery of eggs. In one home, a clutch of eggs was found in a ceramic pot, each one carbonized but perfectly whole, a snapshot of a household's provisions. This level of preservation is staggering. It doesn't just tell us what was on the menu, it reveals portion sizes, food presentation, and storage methods. We can see the very bread that was baked for that day's meals, the fruit set aside for a snack, the eggs collected for the next recipe. These are not just nutrients, they are the ingredients of shared meals and family life, preserved with an intimacy that bridges the millennia. The volcano, in its destructive path, inadvertently created the world's most detailed and poignant grocery list, giving us a taste of the ancient world in the most literal sense imaginable. This artistic legacy, protected from the elements for centuries, gives us access to the ancient mind in a way that no history book ever could. Stepping into a home in Akrotiri or Pompeii is not just walking through empty rooms, it is entering a gallery where the walls themselves speak. The frescoes that adorn these spaces are not mere decoration. They are windows into the worldview of the people who lived there. In Akrotiri, the walls are alive with a sense of joy and reverence for the natural world. The spring fresco, with its sweeping landscape of red lilies and swooping swallows, is more than a pretty picture. It is a celebration of the cycles of nature, perhaps even a visual prayer for fertility and renewal. Another famous fresco, The Boxing Boys, shows two young athletes engaged in sport, their muscular forms captured with a fluid, almost modern realism that reveals the Minoan appreciation for the human body and physical prowess. These were not artists working in isolation. They were translating the core values and spiritual beliefs of their society onto the very walls of their homes, creating an environment that was both beautiful and meaningful. The technique itself is a marvel of preservation. Fresco painting involves applying pigments to wet plaster, causing the colors to bond chemically with the wall as it dries. This method creates incredibly durable art, but it is still vulnerable to centuries of rain, wind, and sun. The volcanic ash acted as a perfect shield, sealing these vibrant works away from time. In Pompeii, the range of subjects is breathtaking. We move from grand mythological scenes in the villas of the wealthy, like the famous depiction of the marriage of Zeus and Hera, to more intimate and whimsical panels in smaller homes. A bakery might have a simple painting of a deity to bless the enterprise, while a triclinium or dining room might feature delicate still lifes of fruit and game, designed to stimulate conversation and appetite. The famous Villa of the Mysteries, just outside Pompeii's walls, contains a cycle of frescoes that is one of the largest and best preserved from antiquity. The paintings, which show a series of figures engaged in what appears to be an initiation rite into a mystery cult, are so vivid and emotionally charged that they feel contemporary. The volcanic seal did not just save the images, it preserved their emotional impact, allowing us to feel the reverence, the fear, and the ecstasy that these rituals inspired 2,000 years ago. But the artistic expression in these cities was not confined to the walls, it was also underfoot. Mosaic floors, crafted from thousands of tiny colored stones called tesserae, were a sign of wealth and status. These intricate designs could be geometric patterns, creating a sense of order and luxury, or elaborate pictorial scenes that acted as a centerpiece for a room. The House of the Faun in Pompeii boasts the magnificent Alexander Mosaic, a sprawling and incredibly detailed depiction of a battle between Alexander the Great and the Persian king Darius. The level of detail is staggering, the fear in the eyes of the horses, the determination on the faces of the soldiers, the intricate patterns on the clothing. This was not just a flaw, it was a statement. The homeowner was proclaiming their sophistication, their knowledge of history, and their immense wealth to every guest who entered. Normally, such a fragile masterpiece would have been shattered by collapsing roofs and eroded by weather. But at Pompeii, the mosaic survived almost intact, allowing us to appreciate the immense skill of ancient artisans and the cosmopolitan tastes of the Roman elite. Perhaps the most democratizing form of art preserved by the ash is also the most humble: graffiti. Scratched into the plaster of walls along busy streets, in taverns, and even in private homes, this is the unfiltered voice of the people. This is not the art of the elite, commissioned and controlled. It is the spontaneous expression of everyday life. The graffiti of Pompeii is a chaotic, vibrant, and deeply human archive. It includes everything from political campaign slogans, "I ask you to elect Gaius Julius Polybius as duumvir, he gets good bread," to personal boasts and insults. One famous inscription simply states, "I made bread here," a proud declaration of a tradesman's presence. Another offers a more philosophical take, "Nothing can last forever." When the sun has shone, it returns to the ocean. The moon wanes after it is full. There are declarations of love, "Restituta, take off your tunic, please, and show us your hairy privates," and simple drawings of gladiators, ships, and phalluses for good luck. This informal art removes the barrier between us and the ancient world. It reveals their sense of humor, their worries, their political passions, and their very human preoccupations. It shows us that the people of Pompeii were not just statuesque figures from a distant past. They were individuals who joked, loved, argued, and scribbled on walls, just like people do today. This combination of high art and street-level commentary provides a full-spectrum view of ancient culture, from its most refined ideals to its most raw and honest expressions. Moving from the quiet intimacy of the home to the bustling energy of the public square, these preserved cities reveal themselves not just as places of residence, but as vibrant, pulsing economic engines. The volcanic ash did more than freeze domestic life. It captured commerce in action, providing an unparalleled snapshot of ancient economic systems that were far more complex and interconnected than we might have imagined. This is where history moves beyond the individual and into the dynamics of an entire society, allowing us to trace the flow of goods, the specialization of labor, and the very rhythm of the marketplace. Stepping into a street in Pompeii is like walking into a downtown district that has just closed for the day, with every shop and workshop holding its secrets ready for the next morning's business that would never come. Consider the sheer variety of commercial enterprises preserved in astonishing detail. One of the most complete examples is a bakery, known as the Bakery of Modestus, where the entire process of bread making is frozen in time. You can walk in and see the large stone grain mills, operated by donkeys who would have walked in circles to grind the wheat into flour. The flour would then be mixed and kneaded in adjacent rooms before being shaped into loaves and placed directly into the massive, brick-lined oven that still stands at the back of the shop. But the most telling detail is what was found inside that oven: 81 loaves of bread, carbonized but perfectly intact, their round forms scored for easy breaking. This wasn't just a home kitchen, this was a full-scale production facility. We can see the division of labor, the technology employed, and the final product all in one space. Even more personal are the financial records implied by the discovery of coins scattered on the floor, suggesting a last-minute transaction or a panicked attempt to grab savings before fleeing. This single establishment gives us a complete microcosm of a small business from production to point of sale. Just a few doors down, another essential service is perfectly preserved, a fullery or a Roman laundry. The fullery of Stephanus provides a fascinating and somewhat pungent look into this vital trade. Laundering in ancient Rome was a complex chemical process. Clothes were not washed with soap as we know it, but were treated with a combination of chemicals. The process began with garments being soaked in large vats of urine, which was collected from public toilets due to its ammonia content, a natural bleaching agent. Workers would then stomp on the clothes in these vats to agitate them, much like stomping grapes. Afterward, the clothes were rinsed and taken to a nearby street to be brushed and treated with fuller's earth, a type of clay that absorbed oils and dirt. The preservation at the fullery of Stephanus shows us all of this: the soaking vats, the pressing machines, and even the political campaign slogans painted on its outer walls, advertising to the steady stream of customers. This level of detail allows us to understand not just a trade, but the entire social and hygienic framework of the city. It reveals a society with specialized service industries catering to a population that valued cleanliness and appearance, a nuance of daily life that is rarely captured so completely. The evidence of trade extends far beyond the city walls, telling a story of a globalized economy that stretched across the ancient world. This narrative is written in the countless amphorae, those distinctive two-handled clay jars found stacked in storerooms, shops, and even in the holds of shipwrecks preserved by the same volcanic events. These jars were the shipping containers of the ancient world, used to transport everything from wine and olive oil to the famous Roman fish sauce, garum. What makes Pompeii and Herculaneum so special is that we don't just have the jars, we often have their contents, or at least the residues that allow for chemical analysis. By studying the shape of the amphora, its clay composition, and the residues inside, archaeologists can pinpoint its origin with remarkable accuracy. An amphora from the island of Rhodes, for instance, has a very specific shape. When one is found in a Pompeian shop, it tells a story of a long sea voyage. Analysis of the residue can confirm it held wine, and further study might even reveal the type of grape. This evidence paints a picture of a thriving Mediterranean trade network. We know that Pompeii was a major exporter of its own wine, but it was also a voracious consumer of goods from across the empire. Olive oil was imported from southern Spain, fine wines came from Greece and the Greek islands, and garum, the pungent, beloved fermented fish sauce, was shipped in from fishing ports in North Africa and Spain. The discovery of these goods in the shops and storerooms of merchants shows a sophisticated system of distribution and retail. We can see how a tavern owner would have purchased amphorae of wine from a ship in the port of Pompeii, transported them to his establishment, and then served the wine to customers in smaller, local vessels. This isn't just about luxury items for the rich. Garum was a staple condiment found in even the most modest kitchens, indicating that these trade goods permeated all levels of society. The economy of these cities was not insular. It was deeply enmeshed in a web of commercial exchange that brought the flavors of the entire Mediterranean to the tables of ordinary citizens, revealing a level of economic connectivity that rivals our modern global market. Perhaps the most significant economic revelation is the sheer degree of labor specialization. The volcanic preservation allows us to identify not just broad categories like merchant or craftsman, but highly specific trades. There were separate shops for metalworkers who specialized in bronze versus those who worked with iron. A vinarius was a wine cellar, distinct from a corpo who ran a general tavern. There were jewelers, rope makers, sandal makers, and potters, each with their own distinct workshops, tools, and partially finished products. In one metalworking shop, the eruption interrupted work on a set of bronze hinges, which were found alongside the tools used to make them. This snapshot of interrupted labor is priceless. It shows the artisan's process, the tools of his trade, and the specific product he was creating at a precise moment in time. This level of specialization indicates a complex economy where individuals could make a living by focusing on a single, narrow skill, relying on a robust market to purchase all the other goods and services they needed. It points to a society with a substantial middle class of skilled artisans and shopkeepers, an economic structure that supported a diverse and vibrant urban life. The volcano, in its indiscriminate embrace, preserved the entire economic ecosystem, from the importer on the docks to the shopkeeper on the street and the customer in the tavern, allowing us to understand ancient commerce not as a theoretical model, but as a living, breathing reality. The meticulous work of an archaeologist with a trowel and brush will always be the heart of discovery, but today, that work is guided by an invisible hand of technology that allows us to see through the earth itself. We've moved far beyond the era of simply digging down until we hit something interesting. Modern archaeology is now a discipline of precision, where the goal is to understand as much as possible while disturbing as little as possible, preserving these fragile sites for the future. This shift is powered by an array of non-invasive tools that act like superpowers for researchers, letting them peer into the past without ever breaking the surface. One of the most revolutionary of these tools is LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Imagine being able to strip away an entire forest with the click of a button. That's essentially what LiDAR does. Mounted on an airplane or a drone, it fires millions of laser pulses at the ground. By measuring how long it takes for each pulse to bounce back, it creates an incredibly detailed, three-dimensional map of the terrain below, filtering out vegetation to reveal the subtle bumps and depressions of ancient structures hidden beneath. This technology has been used to map entire landscapes around volcanic sites, revealing road networks, field boundaries, and even previously unknown buildings that have been swallowed by nature for centuries. It's like having a detailed floor plan of a lost city before a single shovel of dirt is moved. Similarly, ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, works like an ultrasound for the Earth. By sending radar pulses into the ground and analyzing the signals that bounce back, it can detect changes in soil density, revealing the outlines of walls, foundations, and even empty spaces like tombs or storage pits. This allows archaeologists to target their excavations with surgical precision, knowing exactly where to dig to answer specific questions, rather than relying on guesswork. This not only saves immense time and resources, but more importantly, ensures that undisturbed areas of the site remain perfectly preserved for future generations who will have even better technologies at their disposal. Once an object or a set of remains is carefully excavated, the technological analysis begins in earnest, often in a laboratory setting. Take the heartbreakingly personal plaster casts of the victims of Pompeii. For over a century, these casts were sacred, untouchable objects. We could see their external forms, but their internal secrets remained locked away, as breaking them open to study the skeletons inside would have meant destroying the cast itself. Now we have computed tomography or CT scanning. Just as a hospital uses a CT scanner to see inside a human body without surgery, archaeologists can now place an entire plaster cast into a medical scanner. The machine creates a detailed three-dimensional image of the skeleton nestled within the plaster, allowing scientists to study the bones for age, sex, signs of disease, and even cause of death, all without causing a single bit of damage. This has led to significant revisions in our understanding. For instance, scans have revealed that some individuals previously thought to be women, based on the shape of the cast, were actually men, and they have provided detailed evidence of the injuries sustained during the eruption. This non-destructive analysis respects the integrity of these poignant memorials, while unlocking a new level of biographical detail about the people they represent. On an even smaller scale, the science of genetics has opened a window into the most intimate details of ancient lives. By extracting tiny samples of DNA from well-preserved bones or teeth, researchers can now answer questions that were once the realm of pure speculation. They can determine genetic relationships, proving that a group of skeletons found huddled together were, in fact, a family. Analysis of mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down through the maternal line, can trace a person's deep ancestry, revealing whether an individual was a local or had migrated from a distant region, providing clues about trade, slavery, and population movement in the Roman Empire. Furthermore, paleopathologists can now identify the DNA of ancient pathogens. They can detect the presence of diseases like tuberculosis or malaria in skeletal remains, giving us a revolutionary understanding of the health challenges these ancient populations faced. This turns an anonymous skeleton from a statistic into a person with a medical history, whose very cells tell a story of where they came from and what they endured in life. Finally, the very materials that made up the ancient world are now telling their own stories through chemical analysis. Techniques like mass spectrometry can analyze the elemental composition of artifacts with incredible precision. A simple pottery jar or amphora found in a shop in Pompeii might seem like a mundane object, but by taking a minuscule sample of its clay and analyzing its chemical fingerprint, scientists can compare it to known clay sources across the Mediterranean. They can often pinpoint the exact region or even the specific workshop where the pot was made. This transforms a simple container into a witness for long-distance trade, proving that olive oil from Spain or wine from Greece was a staple on Roman tables. Similarly, analyzing metal objects can reveal the sources of the ore, telling us about mining practices and economic networks. These micro-destructive techniques, using a sample so small it's barely visible, allow us to understand the ancient economy on a global scale, tracing the journey of an object from its raw materials to its final resting place under the ash. This technological revolution means that every artifact, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, has the potential to tell a grand story about human connection, resourcefulness, and the vast, interconnected world of the past. While we often focus on the human stories captured by volcanic ash, these same layers hold a completely different kind of archive, one that records the very world those people inhabited. The ash that fell on Pompeii or Akrotiri didn't just bury a city. It captured an entire ecosystem at a single moment in time. Think of each layer as a geological photograph, but one that contains far more information than a simple image. By analyzing the chemical and physical properties of the ash itself, along with the organic materials it instantly preserved, scientists can reconstruct the ancient environment with astonishing precision. This turns a volcanic deposit into a powerful proxy, a stand-in for direct measurements of a world that has long since vanished. It allows us to answer questions we never thought possible. What was the weather like on the day Vesuvius erupted? What crops were thriving in the fields around the volcano? Was the climate changing, placing subtle pressures on the society that lived there? This environmental data adds a profound new dimension to our understanding, moving beyond what people built and owned to reveal how they interacted with the natural world that sustained them. One of the most direct ways to read this ancient environment is through the study of pollen, a field known as palynology. Plants release countless microscopic pollen grains into the air, each species with a uniquely shaped grain that is incredibly durable. Under normal conditions, these grains settle and decompose, but when a volcanic eruption occurs, it acts like a snapshot, trapping this invisible cloud of pollen in the falling ash and sealing it away from decay. By taking a core sample from the volcanic layer at a site like Joya de Cerén, scientists can process the ash to extract these ancient pollen grains. Under a microscope, a whole landscape comes back to life. A high percentage of maize pollen tells us that corn was a dominant crop, cultivated in large fields nearby. The presence of pollen from manioc or other root crops, which is often harder to find, confirms their importance in the local diet. But it's not just about food. The pollen record also reveals weeds that grew in disturbed soils, ornamental plants that might have been grown in gardens, and the types of wild trees that made up the surrounding forest. This provides a complete picture of the local vegetation, showing not only what people were farming but also the biodiversity of their environment. It can even indicate the season of the eruption. A prevalence of certain flowering plant pollens can tell us if it was spring or late summer when the disaster struck, adding a heartbreakingly specific detail to the timeline of the catastrophe. Beyond the biological clues, the volcanic ash itself carries a chemical signature of the atmosphere through which it traveled. When a volcano erupts, it blasts millions of tons of material high into the air. As this ash plume travels and settles, it can incorporate isotopes and trace elements from the contemporary atmosphere. Sophisticated laboratory analysis can sometimes detect the remnants of these interactions, offering indirect clues about atmospheric composition. Furthermore, the ash layer acts as a perfect sealant for the ground surface it covers. By studying the soil directly beneath the ash, scientists can analyze its chemistry. The nutrient content, acidity, and presence of certain minerals can reveal the health of the soil that supported agriculture. For example, evidence of soil erosion or depletion beneath the ash layer at a site could indicate that farming practices were becoming unsustainable, an environmental pressure that might have contributed to social stress long before the volcano finally erupted. This allows us to see the ancient landscape not as a static backdrop, but as a dynamic system that the inhabitants were actively managing, for better or for worse. This rich environmental data is crucial for solving one of archaeology's biggest puzzles: the relationship between climate change and the rise and fall of civilizations. A volcanic ash layer provides an absolute date, a fixed point in time. When we find such a layer at an archaeological site, we know exactly when that snapshot of the environment was taken. If we see evidence in the pollen record of a shift from drought-resistant plants to species that require more water, it suggests the climate was becoming wetter. Conversely, evidence of soil salinity or an increase in desert-adapted plants points toward aridity. By correlating these precise environmental snapshots from volcanic sites with evidence from other archives like ice cores or lake sediments, researchers can build a detailed timeline of climate change. For instance, was a period of prolonged drought putting pressure on the water supply of an ancient city? Did a sudden period of cooling affect crop yields? The volcanic time capsule allows us to move beyond speculation and see exactly what the environmental conditions were like at key moments in a civilization's history. It helps us understand whether a society collapsed solely because of a cataclysmic eruption, or if it was already vulnerable due to decades of environmental degradation, making the volcanic event the final blow to an already struggling system. Ultimately, this environmental dimension transforms our understanding of these ancient disasters from a simple story of destruction into a complex narrative of human adaptation. The people of Pompeii, Akrotiri, and Joya de Cerén were not just living in their cities, they were living with their land. They understood the seasons, they knew which crops would grow in their soil, and they developed technologies to manage their water and resources. The volcanic ash preserved a moment in that ongoing relationship. It shows us a society that was, in many cases, thriving within its environmental niche. The sophisticated irrigation channels at Akrotiri speak to a mastery of water management. The carefully intercropped fields at Joya de Cerén reveal a deep knowledge of sustainable agriculture. By studying the world they lived in, we gain a much deeper appreciation for their ingenuity and resilience. The volcano, in its ultimate destructive act, did more than preserve their artifacts. It preserved the context of their lives, allowing us to see them not as passive victims of nature, but as active participants in a delicate balance with their environment, a balance that was frozen in time on the day the world ended. But what happens after the dust settles and the survivors have scattered? The physical destruction of a volcanic eruption is immediate, but its impact on the human imagination can last for millennia, transforming raw trauma into powerful, enduring legends. These preserved sites offer us a unique laboratory to study this very process, to dissect the relationship between a historical catastrophe and the myths that grow around it, allowing us to see how fact becomes folklore. The most famous example of this is the tantalizing link between the colossal eruption of Thera on Santorini and one of the world's most captivating stories, the legend of Atlantis. The Greek philosopher Plato, writing about 2,300 years ago, described Atlantis as a powerful, technologically advanced island kingdom that fell out of favor with the gods and sank beneath the waves in a single day and night of misfortune. For centuries, this was considered a philosophical fable, a moral tale about hubris. But when archaeologists began to uncover the magnificent Bronze Age city of Akrotiri on Santorini, buried by a volcanic eruption so massive it likely caused the center of the island to collapse into the sea, the parallels became impossible to ignore. Here was a sophisticated, wealthy maritime civilization, incredibly advanced for its time, wiped out in a cataclysm that would have involved earthquakes, tsunamis, and the island literally being buried under ash and pumice. The reality of Akrotiri doesn't match Plato's description perfectly. The timelines are off by centuries, and the location doesn't align exactly, but the kernel of truth is powerfully evident. It's easy to imagine how stories of this devastating event, passed down through generations of traders and sailors across the Mediterranean, could have been embellished and transformed over 1,000 years into the epic tale of a lost utopia. The archaeological reality of Akrotiri gives the myth of Atlantis a historical anchor, showing us how a real, tangible disaster can provide the seed for a legendary narrative about the awesome power of nature and the fragility of human achievement. On the other hand, the eruption of Vesuvius presents a different kind of myth-making, one grounded in immediate, eyewitness testimony that itself became our archetype. We are extraordinarily fortunate to have the letters of Pliny the Younger, who described the eruption from a safe distance across the bay. His account, written to the historian Tacitus, is not a myth in the traditional sense, but it created the literary blueprint for every volcanic disaster story that followed. Pliny's description of the towering, mushroom-shaped cloud, the hail of pumice, the darkness thicker than any night, and the terror of the fleeing crowds established the very language we use to describe such events. His narrative immortalized his uncle, Pliny the Elder, who died while attempting a rescue by sea, creating the archetype of the heroic scientist who dies in pursuit of knowledge. This first-hand report is a powerful counterpoint to the legend of Atlantis. Instead of a story distorted by centuries of retelling, we have a near instantaneous record. Yet, even here, archaeology has revealed where the written word falls short. Pliny wrote from his vantage point at Misenum, about 18 miles away. His account focuses on the visual spectacle and his personal experience of fear. The archaeological record from Pompeii and Herculaneum fills in the horrifying details he could not see. The way people actually died, the intimate moments in their homes, the fact that many perished not from ash fall but from the instantaneous, searing heat of the pyroclastic surges. Science has corrected the historical record, showing that death for many was even more swift and brutal than Pliny could have known. His letters gave us the framework of the disaster, but the silent testimony of the ruins provides the visceral, human truth that his words could only approximate. This interplay between myth and reality enriches our understanding in a profound way. It shows that these stories are not mere fantasies. They are a fundamental part of how human societies process and make sense of unimaginable trauma. A catastrophic event is so disruptive to the world order that it demands an explanation that transcends simple cause and effect. Attributing the destruction of Akrotiri to the wrath of the gods, or weaving it into a cautionary tale about a prideful civilization like Atlantis, is a way of imposing meaning on chaos. It transforms a random natural disaster into a narrative with a moral, a lesson about the relationship between humanity and the divine or the natural world. The survivors and their descendants needed to answer the question, why did this happen? And myth provided that answer in a way that raw geology could not. The archaeological evidence doesn't debunk these legends. Instead, it gives them depth and context. It shows us the real event that was so shocking, so culturally devastating, that it required the creation of a grand story to contain it. We can see the grains of truth that were amplified and reshaped by collective memory and the human need for meaning. Furthermore, these sites reveal what gets lost in the telling. The myth of Atlantis is all about kings, power, and glittering palaces. The archaeological reality of Akrotiri certainly includes grand buildings and beautiful art, but it also reveals the lives of everyday traders, artisans, and farmers. The legend forgets the common people. Similarly, while Pliny's letters focus on the dramatic events affecting his social class, the ruins of Pompeii shout the stories of the baker, the slave, and the shopkeeper. This is a constant theme in the dialogue between archaeology and myth. The voices of the elite and the dramatic are the ones that get recorded and immortalized, while the mundane reality of the majority is often silent in the historical record. It is only through the volcanic preservation of their world that these silent voices are finally heard, correcting the bias of both ancient historians and myth makers. By holding the myth and the archaeological evidence side by side, we gain a more complete picture not only of what happened, but of how it was experienced, remembered, and ultimately, how it came to define a culture's understanding of its own place in a dangerous and unpredictable world. This incredible access to the past, however, comes with a profound responsibility that weighs heavily on the shoulders of archaeologists and conservators. The very act of uncovering these frozen moments begins a new race against time, a battle to protect them from the modern world they've been reintroduced to. Imagine a delicate wooden object that has survived for 2,000 years in the perfect, stable environment of its volcanic tomb. The moment it is exposed to the open air, it is assaulted by fluctuating temperatures, humidity, pollution, and even the subtle vibrations from millions of footsteps. The dilemma is stark. To excavate is to learn, but it is also to inevitably accelerate decay. This has led to a significant shift in archaeological philosophy. In the early days of exploration, the goal was often to uncover as much as possible, as quickly as possible. Today, the prevailing wisdom is to excavate only when necessary, and only when there is a clear conservation plan and the funding to support it. Large sections of both Pompeii and Herculaneum have been intentionally left buried, a legacy saved for future generations who will undoubtedly possess even more sophisticated technologies for both discovery and preservation. It's a humbling acknowledgement that we are not the final owners of this heritage, but merely its temporary stewards. The sheer weight of public fascination creates another layer of challenge. The millions of visitors who walk the ancient streets of Pompeii each year are a testament to the powerful human connection these sites inspire. This tourism provides the essential funding for ongoing conservation work, yet the constant flow of people is itself a primary agent of erosion. The stone paving blocks, worn smooth by Roman cartwheels, are now being slowly ground down by modern sneakers and hiking boots. The vibrations from crowds can destabilize fragile walls and frescoes. Sunscreen, sweat, and the mere exhalation of carbon dioxide in enclosed spaces can alter the microclimate and contribute to the deterioration of priceless artwork. Managing this impact is a logistical and ethical tightrope. Site managers employ ingenious strategies, from creating one-way walking routes to disperse crowds, to installing protective glass over particularly vulnerable frescoes, and limiting the number of visitors allowed into the most delicate structures at any one time. The goal is not to keep people out, but to find a sustainable way for them to experience the site without loving it to death. Perhaps the most poignant ethical questions revolve around the human remains. The plaster casts of Pompeii's victims are among the most powerful and popular exhibits in the world. They are unparalleled educational tools, making the abstract tragedy of history viscerally real. But are we looking at an archaeological artifact, or are we standing in a cemetery? These were people who died in terror, whose final moments are captured in heartbreaking detail. There is an ongoing debate about the dignity owed to these individuals. Should their remains be left on public display, or should they be given a more private, respectful context? Some argue that displaying them is a form of exploitation, turning personal tragedy into a spectacle. Others contend that to hide them away would be to sanitize history and disrespect the memory of those who died by forgetting the very human cost of the disaster. Different sites have taken different approaches. At Herculaneum, where skeletons are found, they are often displayed in situ, but with a more subdued and respectful presentation than the dramatic poses of the Pompeii cast. There is no easy answer, and the conversation continues to evolve as our societal views on death, display, and respect change over time. Ultimately, the core challenge is one of balance. How do we balance the public's right to access and learn from this incredible heritage with the absolute imperative to preserve it for the future? How do we balance the scientific value of continued excavation with the risk of exposing more irreplaceable material to the elements? This is not a problem with a single solution, but a continuous process of assessment, adaptation, and compromise. It requires massive financial investment in conservation science, creative crowd management, and a deep, ongoing dialogue with the public about the fragility of these treasures. The work being done today is as much about conservation as it is about excavation. Teams of restorers, engineers, and scientists are engaged in a constant, painstaking battle to stabilize collapsing walls, clean fragile frescoes, and monitor the structural health of the entire site. They are the unsung heroes ensuring that the window into the past, so miraculously opened by volcanic fire, remains clear for the generations yet to come. But to truly appreciate the singular power of this volcanic time capsule, we need to place it side by side with other remarkable methods nature has devised for saving pieces of the past. Each of these natural preservers has its own unique specialty, like a museum curator with a specific focus, but none can match the all-encompassing, three-dimensional snapshot that a volcanic eruption provides. Consider the incredible bog bodies of Northern Europe, individuals whose remains have been found perfectly preserved in the cold, acidic, and oxygen-poor environment of peat bogs. The chemistry of these wetlands tans skin and hair, turning it to leather, and preserves the body with such fidelity that we can see the stubble on a man's chin or the intricate patterns of his last meal in his stomach. It is an unparalleled window into the final moments of an individual, often revealing evidence of ritual sacrifice. Yet, for all its intimate detail, a bog preserves only the individual and whatever small objects were with them. The world they lived in, their home, their village, the landscape they walked is entirely gone. The context has vanished. It is a portrait without its background, a single character lifted from the stage of their life. Then there is the preservation offered by arid environments, like the deserts of Egypt or Peru. The relentless dry heat and sand can act as a fantastic desiccant, pulling moisture from organic materials so quickly that decay cannot begin. This is how we have the stunning textiles of the Pyroclastic culture in Peru, fabrics so vibrant and complex they look as if they were woven yesterday. It's how we have the mummies of ancient Egypt, not just the royal pharaohs but everyday people, their skin and hair intact, often buried with their personal possessions. Deserts excel at saving what they touch, but their touch is selective. They preserve what is buried with the body, but they are far less kind to the structures above ground. The mud brick cities of these civilizations are often weathered back to their foundations, leaving us with the plan of a building but none of the life that animated it. The wooden furniture, the food on the table, the sense of a living community, these are largely lost. The desert gives us the contents of a tomb, a carefully prepared package for the afterlife, but a volcanic eruption gives us the contents of an entire, bustling town, frozen in the midst of its daily life. Perhaps the most dramatic comparison is with preservation by ice. The discovery of Ötzi, the Iceman in the Alps, gave us a man from 5,300 years ago, complete with his clothing, his tools, his weapons, and even the contents of his stomach, telling us he had eaten ibex meat just before his death. Glaciers and permafrost can freeze dry a moment with breathtaking precision, but this form of preservation is inherently limited by geography and climate. It only occurs in the world's cold extremes. A volcanic eruption, by contrast, is not bound by latitude. It can create a time capsule in the tropics, in temperate zones, anywhere tectonic forces are at work. More importantly, freezing typically preserves an individual or a small group in a remote, often high-altitude setting. It captures a traveler on a journey, not a society in its full, complex operation. We learn about Ötzi's personal story, his health, his technology, but we don't see the village he came from, the house he lived in, or the social structure that defined his world. The volcano preserves the entire play with all the actors on stage, the set intact, and the script open to the very page they were performing. This is the defining characteristic, the holistic nature of volcanic preservation that sets it apart. It's the difference between finding a single, beautifully preserved letter and discovering an entire, fully staffed office building with papers on every desk, coffee in the mugs, and computers still humming. The volcanic ash doesn't just save objects, it saves relationships. A tool is found right next to the material it was working on. A meal is left on the table with the serving dishes and the discarded bones. At Joya de Cerén, a garden was preserved with the ridges of the soil and the plants still in the ground, right next to the home and the cooking utensils. This spatial context is everything to an archaeologist. It allows them to understand function, sequence, and social organization in a way that isolated finds never can. A bog body tells a personal tragedy. The streets of Pompeii tell the story of an entire urban economy, from the senator in his villa to the slave in the bakery, all interconnected and preserved in a single, catastrophic instant. This comprehensive capture makes volcanic sites arguably the most valuable time capsules on Earth, providing a level of detail about everyday life in the past that is simply unrecoverable from any other source. For all the incredible clarity these time capsules provide, they are also filled with profound and haunting silences. The very perfection of the preservation creates some of archaeology's most tantalizing puzzles, questions that linger in the still air of the excavated streets and challenge our assumptions about that final, fateful day. Take the enduring mystery of those who chose to stay behind in Pompeii. We know that many residents heeded the early warning signs, the earthquakes in the days prior, the initial ash fall, and managed to escape. So why did so many others remain, sealing their own fate? For a long time, the prevailing image was one of sudden, inescapable doom, a cataclysm that struck without warning. But the archaeological evidence suggests a more complex and perhaps more tragic story. The eruption unfolded over nearly 24 hours. There was ample time to flee. So what was the calculus of that fatal decision? Were some simply too frail or infirm to attempt the journey? Did others, perhaps veterans of past tremors, gravely underestimate the threat, believing they could wait it out as they had before? Or was there a powerful human instinct to protect their homes and life's possessions, a gamble that the roof would hold and the air would clear? The discovery of valuable items like coins and jewelry scattered amongst the remains suggests that some were in the process of gathering their wealth before a last-minute, desperate attempt to escape, an attempt that ended just feet from their doorsteps. Each skeleton, each cast, represents an individual story we can only partially reconstruct, a final, private decision made in the face of an unimaginable crisis that we, from our safe distance, can never fully comprehend. Perhaps the greatest literary mystery lies buried not in Pompeii, but in its sister city, Herculaneum. There, in the 1750s, excavators of the magnificent Villa dei Papyri made a discovery that has tantalized scholars ever since: a library. But not a library of codices or stone tablets. This was a collection of over 1,800 papyrus scrolls, carbonized by the searing heat of the pyroclastic surge. They are the only surviving library from the classical world, a potential treasure trove of lost philosophical texts, poetry, and historical works. The tragedy is that they were transformed into lumps of brittle, carbonized rock. Early attempts to open them were disastrous, causing many to crumble into unreadable fragments. For centuries, they have sat in museums, their secrets locked away, visible but utterly inaccessible. Today, however, we stand on the brink of a technological revolution. Using techniques like sophisticated X-ray phase contrast tomography, scientists are now attempting to virtually unroll these scrolls. The idea is to scan them with such precision that the ink, which contains trace metals, creates a subtle contrast against the carbonized papyrus, allowing a computer algorithm to detect the letters on each curled-up layer without ever physically touching the scroll. Recent breakthroughs have successfully identified individual words and phrases, proving the concept is viable. The dream is that within our lifetimes, we may be able to read these texts in their entirety. What lost plays of Sophocles or histories of Livy might they contain? The villa belonged to Julius Caesar's father-in-law, a man of immense culture and wealth. His library could fundamentally reshape our understanding of Greek and Roman literature. It is a mystery literally waiting to be decoded, a silent library on the verge of finally speaking. Beyond the drama of individual choices and lost libraries, there are broader, systemic mysteries about the ancient world that these sites are uniquely positioned to solve. The spectacular frescoes and artifacts from Akrotiri on Santorini clearly point to a society enmeshed in a vast web of Mediterranean trade. But what was the true extent of this network? We can see the evidence in the pots from Crete, the precious stones from Anatolia, and the distinctive artistic influences from Egypt and the Near East. Yet the precise mechanisms of this exchange remain elusive. Was Akrotiri a major maritime power in its own right, with a fleet of ships plying the seas, or was it a wealthy intermediary, a hub where goods from across the known world were traded and transshipped? The volcanic ash preserved the end products, the beautiful finished goods, but it didn't preserve the ship's logs, the merchants' contracts, or the accounting ledgers that would detail the economics of this trade. Every season of excavation has the potential to uncover a new warehouse or a shipwreck preserved in the ash, which could reveal not just what was traded, but how and by whom, painting a dynamic picture of the first truly globalized economy. This points to the most exciting aspect of all. These sites are not dead. They are not museums where the collection is complete and the labels are final. They are active, breathing fields of scientific inquiry. Less than 2/3 of Pompeii has been excavated. Vast portions of Herculaneum still lie beneath the modern town of Herculaneum. At Akrotiri, new, multi-story buildings are still being carefully uncovered, each room holding the potential for a discovery that could rewrite a chapter of Bronze Age history. With every new technology, from ground-penetrating radar that maps buried structures to DNA analysis that can trace the origins of a single individual, we are asking new questions of the old ash. We are no longer just looking for objects. We are seeking to understand genetics, diets, diseases, and social connections on an intimate level. The clay does indeed still hold many secrets, and each one uncovered reminds us that the past is not a fixed story in a book, but a living narrative that we are only just beginning to read. The final chapter on Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Akrotiri is far from written. With every carefully brushed away layer of volcanic dust, we turn a page, forever deepening our conversation with those who came before us. While the human stories from Pompeii and Herculaneum capture our hearts, there is another, quieter revolution that these volcanic layers have sparked, one that has fundamentally reshaped the very backbone of history, our understanding of time itself. Imagine an archaeologist digging at a site in Turkey, unearthing the remains of an ancient coastal trading post. They find beautiful Minoan pottery from Crete, Egyptian scarabs, and local artifacts, all jumbled together in a layer of soil. The big question is, when did all this happen? Traditionally, dating this assemblage would be a complex puzzle, relying on comparing pottery styles and other objects whose own dates might be uncertain. But then, the archaeologist notices something else, a distinct, fine-grained layer of white ash running through the site. By analyzing the chemical fingerprint of that ash, they can match it conclusively to the colossal eruption of Thera on Santorini, an event that we can now date with remarkable precision. In that single moment, the entire timeline of that trading post snaps into sharp focus. Everything below that ash layer was in place before the eruption. Everything above it was deposited after. This is the power of tephrochronology, the science of using volcanic ash layers as absolute chronological markers, and it has turned the chaotic timeline of the ancient world into a meticulously ordered calendar. The principle is elegantly simple. A major volcanic eruption is a geological event of breathtaking brevity. In a matter of hours or days, it spews a unique mixture of minerals and volcanic glass across vast distances, creating an instantaneous, widespread layer that settles over everything in its path. This layer, or tephra, acts like a timestamp written in stone and ash. The eruption of Vesuvius in the year 79 is the classic example. Because we have the first-hand account of Pliny the Younger, we know the exact year, almost the exact day when that ash fell. So, when archaeologists excavating a villa in southern France find that same distinctive 79 AD Vesuvian ash layer in their trench, they have a fixed point. They can say with certainty that the floor of that villa and any artifacts sealed beneath that ash existed before the late summer of 79. It's like finding a dated newspaper in the walls of an old house during a renovation. It doesn't just date the newspaper, it dates the construction of the wall itself. This method provides an absolute date, independent of the often debated sequences of pottery styles or architectural phases, cutting through centuries of scholarly argument with geological certainty. But the real magic of tephrochronology happens when we move to eruptions that occurred before written records, and here, the eruption of Thera is the superstar. The explosion that buried Akrotiri was one of the most violent volcanic events in human history, and its ash fell over an enormous area of the eastern Mediterranean. For decades, archaeologists argued fiercely about its date, with estimates ranging from the late 16th century BC to the early 15th century BC. This wasn't just an academic debate. The date of the Thera eruption is the linchpin for the entire chronology of the Bronze Age in the region. If Thera erupted in 1520 BC, then the magnificent frescoes and pottery found at Akrotiri represent the peak of Minoan culture on Crete at that time. If it erupted a century later, it forces a complete reassessment of the timeline, suggesting that this golden age began later or lasted longer. The implications ripple outwards, affecting our understanding of the rise of Mycenaean Greece and even the chronology of ancient Egypt with which the Minoans traded. By using advanced techniques like radiocarbon dating on seeds and olive twigs found buried in the ash at Akrotiri, and by matching the chemical signature of the ash found in ice cores from Greenland, scientists have now converged on a date around 1600 BC. This single, firmly anchored date acts as a stable pillar, allowing historians to synchronize the chronologies of cultures that left few written records of their own, creating a unified, accurate timeline for the entire Aegean world. This ability to correlate timelines across vast distances is perhaps the greatest gift of tephrochronology. Before this technique, the history of the ancient Mediterranean was like a room full of clocks, each ticking to its own rhythm. The Egyptian timeline, based on king lists and astronomical observations, was one clock. The Minoan timeline, based on pottery sequences, was another. The Hittite timeline was yet another. It was incredibly difficult to know if a particular event in Crete happened at the same time as a specific pharaoh's reign in Egypt. Volcanic ash layers provide the missing link. When the same layer from the Thera eruption is identified in an archaeological layer in Egypt, it proves unequivocally that the Egyptian artifacts in that layer were contemporary with the Minoan artifacts found under the ash at Akrotiri. It's as if all the clocks in the room were suddenly stopped and restarted at the same moment, bringing them all into perfect synchrony. This has revolutionized our understanding of interaction and influence. We can now see not just that the Minoans and Egyptians were in contact, but we can trace the precise ebb and flow of that contact over centuries, understanding how artistic styles and technologies moved across the sea in a now datable sequence of events. The volcano, in its explosive fury, provided the punctuation marks that allow us to read the complex, interconnected sentence of ancient history with newfound clarity and confidence. There is a profound and sobering lesson etched into the very ruins of Pompeii and Akrotiri, one that speaks directly to our modern world. It is a lesson not about art or daily life, but about human psychology in the face of a looming catastrophe. The inhabitants of these cities were not completely unaware of the danger. In the years and even days leading up to the final cataclysm, both sites experienced significant earthquakes. In fact, a major earthquake struck Pompeii in 62 AD, 17 years before Vesuvius erupted, causing extensive damage that was still being repaired when the volcano finally blew. For the people living there, these tremors were a part of life, a familiar rumble from the mountain they called home. They lacked the crucial scientific understanding that would connect these seismic shudders to the magma chamber filling deep beneath their feet. What we now recognize as clear warning signs were, to them, isolated events, inconveniences to be repaired and then forgotten. This tragic gap in knowledge highlights a fundamental challenge in disaster preparedness, the difficulty of recognizing a true pattern of danger when you are living inside of it. The human tendency is to normalize the unusual, to explain away the warnings because the alternative, abandoning your home and your livelihood, is simply too terrifying to contemplate. This historical perspective forces us to examine our own modern vulnerabilities. Today, we are armed with a deep understanding of plate tectonics and sophisticated monitoring technology that can detect the slightest inflation of a volcano's slopes or the faintest harmonic tremors that signal rising magma. We have the science that the ancients lacked, yet the human element remains the weakest link in the chain of survival. The experiences of Pompeii and Akrotiri teach us that technology is useless without a population that is educated, prepared, and willing to act. A siren is just a noise if people do not know what it means or where to go. An evacuation order is just words if there is no clear plan, no practiced route, and no community trust in the authorities issuing the warning. The parallels are striking. In modern volcanic zones from the Pacific Northwest to Indonesia and Italy itself, officials face the same psychological hurdles. People may be reluctant to leave their homes, their farms, and their animals based on a threat they cannot see, especially if previous warnings have resulted in false alarms. The story of these ancient cities is a permanent reminder that the success of any early warning system depends entirely on the preparedness and the willingness of the people it is designed to protect. Perhaps the most crucial insight from these sites is the sheer speed with which a volcanic crisis can escalate from manageable threat to unsurvivable catastrophe. The eruption of Vesuvius did not instantly destroy Pompeii. For many hours, it was a terrifying but potentially survivable event, a storm of ash and pumice that collapsed roofs but allowed for movement. This likely created a dangerous sense of false security for those who had chosen to wait it out indoors. The real killer, the pyroclastic surge, arrived with devastating swiftness, moving at highway speeds and delivering heat so intense that it caused instant death. There was no time for second thoughts. This rapid escalation is a critical factor in modern disaster planning. It underscores the absolute necessity of preemptive evacuation when the first credible signs of a major eruption appear. Waiting for visible, undeniable proof of danger, like seeing the pyroclastic flow itself, is a fatal mistake because by then, it is far too late to escape. Modern volcanology focuses on forecasting, on reading the subtle signs that precede an eruption by days or weeks, precisely to avoid being caught in this deadly trap. The goal is to have people safely relocated long before the mountain speaks its final, fiery word. The legacy of these ancient disasters is now woven directly into the fabric of modern risk mitigation. The cities buried by volcanoes serve as powerful case studies for urban planners and emergency managers. They provide a grimly effective map of how a dense population center can be overwhelmed, showing which areas are most vulnerable to ash fall, which are in the direct path of pyroclastic flows, and how infrastructure can fail. This historical data is used to create detailed hazard maps for modern cities located in the shadow of active volcanoes like Naples today. These maps are not abstract exercises. They dictate zoning laws, guide the construction of evacuation routes, and determine the locations of emergency shelters. Furthermore, the ongoing archaeological discoveries contribute to public education in a visceral way. There is no more powerful tool for convincing a resident of modern Herculaneum of the need to participate in an evacuation drill than showing them the skeletons of their Roman predecessors who failed to flee. The past becomes a teacher, its tragedies transformed into actionable knowledge that saves lives. Ultimately, the silent stones of Pompeii and the empty streets of Akrotiri deliver a timeless message about the delicate balance between human civilization and the raw power of the planet. We are drawn to build our communities in beautiful, fertile places, which often happen to be beautiful and fertile precisely because of the volcanic soil deposited by past eruptions. We cannot and should not avoid these landscapes altogether, but we can choose to live in them with wisdom and respect. The lesson is not to fear nature, but to understand it. It is a call for humility, for acknowledging that our technological prowess does not make us masters of the earth, but rather more informed participants in its systems. The ashes that preserved these cities are a permanent memorial to those who perished, but they are also a guidebook for the living. They teach us that the best defense against nature's fury is not resistance, but resilience, a resilience built on scientific literacy, meticulous planning, and a profound respect for the warnings the earth provides, even when they come as gentle tremors rather than roaring flames. Standing amidst the excavated streets of Pompeii, it's easy to feel like the story has been fully told, but the reality is we have only just begun to read the opening chapters. A conscious and profound decision has been made by modern archaeologists to leave the majority of these priceless sites untouched. Nearly a third of Pompeii and even larger portions of Herculaneum still lie buried, not out of neglect, but as a deliberate legacy for the future. This is an act of remarkable humility and foresight. It is an acknowledgement that our current tools, as advanced as they may seem to us, are still crude compared to what future generations will possess. Every time we break ground, we destroy the very context we seek to understand, and we can only record what we are technologically capable of seeing at that moment. By leaving these vast areas sealed in their protective volcanic tombs, we are saving an entire library of the past for the scholars of tomorrow, who will have technologies we can scarcely dream of. It's a promise that the most exciting discoveries are not behind us, but ahead of us. So, what might those future archaeologists find when they finally open this untouched vault? The potential is staggering. In the still buried sections of Herculaneum, where the pyroclastic surges carbonized and sealed everything in an oxygen-free environment, the preservation could be even more exquisite than anything we have yet seen. We might encounter entire rooms with wooden furniture still standing, textiles preserved with their original dyes still faintly visible, and foodstuffs so perfectly conserved that we could analyze their proteins and even their DNA. Perhaps we will find a shipwright's workshop with half-finished boats, or a painter's studio with pots of pigment still lined up on a shelf, ready for use. There is even the tantalizing possibility of finding new types of artifacts made from materials so fragile they have never survived elsewhere. Perhaps intricate works of wicker, leather, or even papyrus documents from a previously unknown library. Each unexcavated structure is a sealed capsule of potential, holding the promise of rewriting a small piece of history or revealing an aspect of Roman life that has been completely invisible to us until now. The key to unlocking these secrets will not be a bigger shovel but a more powerful scanner. The future of archaeology is shifting from the excavation trench to the laboratory. One of the most transformative technologies is advanced three-dimensional imaging. We are moving towards the ability to create perfect, high-resolution digital twins of entire buried cities without ever removing a single stone. Imagine using a combination of ground-penetrating radar, muon tomography, which uses cosmic rays to see deep into solid rock, and drone-based LiDAR to map every wall, every staircase, every pot and pan hidden beneath the earth. This virtual model could then be explored by anyone in the world, from schoolchildren to leading experts, in immersive virtual reality. Scholars could walk through the streets of a completely unexcavated Herculaneum, taking measurements, analyzing spatial relationships, and planning hypothetical excavations with absolute precision. This digital preservation ensures that even if a site is eventually physically excavated, its original buried state is saved forever for future study. On a microscopic scale, the future lies in molecular archaeology. The development of new, non-destructive chemical techniques will allow us to read the biographies of artifacts in ways that are impossible today. We will be able to take a microscopic sample from a pottery jar and not just identify the residue of wine inside, but determine the specific variety of grape, the region it was grown in, and even the vintage year. Spectrometry could analyze the metal of a coin to trace the exact mine the silver came from, mapping economic networks with pinpoint accuracy. We might analyze the plaster of a wall to find the fingerprints of the artisan who applied it, or examine the edge of a tool to detect traces of the specific type of wood it was used to carve. These techniques will move us from understanding what an object is to understanding its entire life story, where it was made, how it was used, who touched it, and what it meant in the daily rhythm of life. The holy grail of this lab-based revolution is the ongoing effort to read the Herculaneum papyri. These carbonized scrolls from the Villa dei Papyri represent the largest library from the ancient world, but they are as fragile as charcoal. For centuries, any attempt to physically unroll them meant their destruction. Now, an international scientific effort is using particle accelerators and advanced X-ray technology to virtually unwrap them. The process involves scanning the scrolls with such intense, focused beams that the subtle contrast between the carbon-based ink and the carbon-based papyrus can be detected. Powerful algorithms then work to digitally flatten the scanned layers, piecing together the text letter by letter. Recent breakthroughs have successfully identified entire paragraphs of text from within completely unopened scrolls, proving that the concept works. The potential payoff is unimaginable. This library could contain lost plays by Sophocles, histories by Livy, philosophical treatises, or even early Christian texts that predate anything we currently have. It is like tuning a radio to a station that has been silent for 2,000 years, slowly bringing the signal into clarity. The success of this project will not only recover lost masterpieces, but will establish a blueprint for how to non-invasively interrogate the most fragile artifacts, ensuring that the next century of discovery is driven not by the force of a trowel, but by the power of a pixel. This connection we feel is something far deeper than simple curiosity. It is a profound, almost unsettling sense of shared humanity that transcends the centuries. We can look at a statue of a Roman emperor and feel a distance, a recognition of power and artistry, but it remains a symbol, an icon. But to stand on the very stones of a Pompeian street, worn smooth by the sandals of people who walked there 2,000 years ago, is to feel that gap of time collapse. Your own feet are standing where theirs stood. You are looking at the same mountain, Vesuvius, that dominated their skyline, though now with a very different understanding of its nature. This is not learning about history. It is, in a small but powerful way, stepping into it. The distance of 2 millennia suddenly feels paper-thin, and the people of the past are no longer abstract figures in a book. They become neighbors, individuals with whom we share the most fundamental human experiences: the need for shelter, the comfort of a meal, the love for family, the fear of the unknown. This empathetic bridge is forged most powerfully by the small, intimate details that volcanic preservation captures so perfectly. It is one thing to read that the Romans ate bread. It is an entirely different, more resonant experience to see the carbonized loaf itself, still resting in the oven where it was baked on the morning of the eruption. You are not just seeing an artifact, you are witnessing the interrupted labor of a baker who woke up before dawn, who kneaded the dough, who hoped to sell his wares to feed his own family. Your mind fills in the gaps: the smell of the baking bread, the heat of the oven, the sound of the baker's voice. Similarly, the discovery of a child's wooden crib in Herculaneum, carbonized but perfectly intact, evokes a universal emotion. Every parent, regardless of era or culture, understands the quiet ritual of soothing a child to sleep. That simple object becomes a direct conduit to a moment of tenderness and care, a private life suddenly made public by tragedy. These are not grand historical narratives. They are the quiet moments that make up a life, and they are moments we all recognize. This is what makes the connection so immediate and so personal. We see our own lives reflected in theirs. Perhaps the most poignant catalyst for this connection is the encounter with the victims themselves. The plaster casts of Pompeii are unique in all of archaeology. They are not skeletons which can feel clinical and distant. They are the shapes of people in their final moments, frozen in postures of desperation, protection, and resignation. Seeing the cast of a person crouching, their hands covering their face, is a heartbreakingly human gesture. We have all instinctively shielded ourselves from harm. We see a mother huddled with her children, and the urge to protect those we love is a feeling that needs no translation across time. These casts force us to confront a shared vulnerability. They are a stark, undeniable reminder of our own mortality. The people of Pompeii were not so different from us. They had plans for the next day. They had arguments and reconciliations. They worried about money and celebrated small joys. Their world ended in a single, catastrophic day, a reminder that the thread of civilization and of individual life is fragile. This confrontation is not meant to frighten us, but to humble us. It places our own brief lives within the vast sweep of human history, fostering a sense of perspective about our own troubles and triumphs. This emotional resonance is the secret ingredient that transforms a dry academic subject into a lifelong passion for so many. It is the reason why millions of people travel to these sites, not as disinterested observers, but as pilgrims seeking a connection. We are drawn to these places because they satisfy a deep human need to understand our place in the chain of existence. They answer a question that goes beyond what people ate or how they built their houses. They offer a glimpse into who they were. This transforms the study of the past from a collection of facts and dates into a deeply humanistic endeavor. It fosters empathy on a grand scale, allowing us to see the common threads of joy, struggle, love, and fear that bind humanity together across the ages. By connecting with the people of Pompeii or Akrotiri on such a personal level, we are not just learning about them, we are learning about ourselves, and in doing so, we develop a greater appreciation for the incredible, enduring, and shared story of human existence. While the ruins of Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Akrotiri exist in distinct corners of the world, separated by vast oceans and centuries, they are bound together by something far more powerful than their shared tragedy. They form a global network, a kind of international alliance of memory, united under a common banner of preservation. This formal recognition comes through their status as UNESCO World Heritage Sites, a designation that elevates them from national treasures to legacies belonging to all of humanity. This isn't merely an honorary title, it's a profound statement of value. UNESCO, the United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization, bestows this status on places deemed to have outstanding universal value, meaning their significance transcends national boundaries and speaks to the collective story of humankind. By inscribing these volcanic time capsules on the World Heritage List, the global community makes a promise to protect them not just for the citizens of Italy or Greece, but for every person on the planet now and in the future. This creates a framework for international cooperation, turning what could be isolated conservation projects into a shared mission. This global network functions as a powerful engine for knowledge and innovation. The challenges of preserving a site buried in volcanic ash are incredibly complex and unique. How do you stabilize a 2,000-year-old wall of frescoes that has been exposed to modern air pollution after being sealed for millennia? How do you manage the footfall of millions of visitors without eroding the very streets they come to see? These are not problems that one nation should have to solve alone. Through the UNESCO network, the conservators working in the shadow of Vesuvius can share their latest techniques with the archaeologists safeguarding Joya de Cerén in El Salvador. They can exchange research on everything from the chemical composition of protective resins to the most effective ways to use drones for site monitoring. A breakthrough in preventing moisture damage at Akrotiri on Santorini can directly benefit the teams at Pompeii. This collaborative spirit accelerates progress, ensuring that the hard-won knowledge from one disaster site becomes a tool for protecting all the others. It transforms competition into collaboration with the common goal of outsmarting time itself. Beyond the technical exchange, this network weaves a richer, more interconnected tapestry of human history. When we study these sites in isolation, we see singular, remarkable stories: a Roman city, a Minoan town, a Maya village. But when we view them as a connected network, a powerful, unifying narrative emerges. We see the common thread of human experience in the face of nature's immense power. The baker who fled his oven in Pompeii, the family that abandoned their evening meal in Joya de Cerén, the artists who left their vibrant frescoes unfinished in Akrotiri, they were all people whose lives were cut short by the same geological forces. This global perspective highlights our shared vulnerability and our shared resilience. It demonstrates that the drive to build communities, to create art, to care for our families, and to simply live our daily lives is a universal constant, connecting cultures across continents and millennia. The volcano, in its impartial destruction, becomes a lens that focuses not on our differences, but on our fundamental human commonalities. This collective ownership also brings a profound sense of responsibility. Recognizing these sites as a global legacy means acknowledging that their preservation is a duty we all share. The funding for conservation no longer falls solely on the host country. International grants and partnerships become possible. More importantly, it fosters a global consciousness about the fragility of our shared cultural heritage. A tourist walking the streets of Pompeii today might be from Japan, Brazil, or Canada. But through the experience of connecting with that distant past, they become a stakeholder in its future. They understand that the erosion of a step in Pompeii is a loss for everyone, not just for Italy. This fosters a sense of global citizenship, an understanding that the footprints of our collective past are precious and non-renewable. The preservation of these sites becomes a testament to our ability to work together across borders, to honor our common history, and to ensure that the silent stories captured in ash continue to speak to generations yet unborn. From the bustling streets of Pompeii to the quiet fields of Joya de Cerén, the artifacts preserved by volcanic eruptions offer an unparalleled gift from the past. They are more than just relics, they are frozen moments that allow us to walk alongside our ancient ancestors, understanding their lives, their struggles, and their humanity. These time capsules remind us of the immense power of nature and the resilience of the human spirit. The secrets revealed from the clay continue to reshape our understanding of history, culture, and even ourselves. As we continue to uncover and analyze these treasures, we are reminded that the past is never truly dead, but merely waiting, patiently preserved for us to listen. This journey through ash and time reveals a profound paradox, where nature's most destructive force becomes its most meticulous archivist. The volcano does not discriminate. It preserves the grand villa and the humble farm with equal fidelity, granting a voice to the common citizen as clearly as to the elite. In doing so, it corrects the historical record, which has so often been written by the powerful. We learn not only from the speeches of senators, but from the scribbles on a tavern wall, not just from the grand mosaic, but from the loaf of bread left in the oven. This is history democratized, a story told not from the top down, but from the ground up in the quiet details of everyday existence. It shows us that the true pulse of a civilization beats not in its monuments, but in the homes, workshops, and markets where life was truly lived. These silent cities also stand as a permanent memorial to human fragility. The casts of the victims are not macabre curiosities. They are a bridge of empathy across 2 millennia. In their final postures, we see our own fears, our own instincts to protect our loved ones, our own vulnerability in the face of forces beyond our control. They are a humbling reminder that the thread of civilization is delicate, and that the world we build so carefully can be reshaped in a single day. Yet within that fragility lies a testament to resilience. The very fact that we can recover these stories, that we can piece together the lives of those who came before us, speaks to an unyielding human drive to understand, to remember, and to connect. The eruption may have ended their world, but it could not erase their story. The work of understanding these treasures is far from over. With each passing year, new technologies allow us to ask new questions of the old ash. The unexcavated portions of these sites are not neglected. They are a conscious legacy, a promise to future generations that the most exciting discoveries are still to come. The ongoing effort to read the carbonized scrolls of Herculaneum, to map buried structures with non-invasive radar, and to analyze the DNA of the past promises to deepen our connection even further. We are not closing a book on these ancient worlds. We are learning how to read its pages with ever greater clarity. The conversation with the past is a continuous one, and we have only just begun to hear the full story. Ultimately, the legacy of these volcanic time capsules is a gift of perspective. They pull us out of the narrow concerns of our present moment and place our lives within the vast, sweeping narrative of humanity. They teach us about the enduring constants of the human experience: love, family, work, community, and the awe-inspiring power of the natural world. As we walk away from these silent streets and buried fields, we carry with us a deeper appreciation for the incredible journey of our species and a profound responsibility to be the stewards of this fragile, shared heritage. The past, preserved in its tomb of clay, has entrusted us with its memory, and in listening to its whispers, we better understand our own place in the long, unbroken chain of human